Hi, I'm Mimi Chan. Welcome to Culture Chat. Thanks for joining the conversation. David Walker is an award-winning comic book writer, author, filmmaker, journalist, and educator. In this episode, we discuss the changes that have occurred due to the pandemic and how that has affected his work. We also address all the racial tensions going on in the world right now and the frustrations for the lack of change. We also delve into the Me Too issues in the comic book industry from women that have spoken out about being victimized. Yeah, this conversation gets a bit intense. I learned so much from this conversation and always enjoy talking to David. If you enjoy these conversations as much as I do, please rate and share this podcast with others. If you would like to help keep this podcast going and become a patron of the show, you can do so on my website or on patreon.com. You can donate as little as $1 per month. Thank you so much for the support. I appreciate it. For comments or suggestions, email me at mimi@culturechatpodcast.com or reach out on social media at SifuMimiChan. Now, on with the show. Hello, David Walker.
Hey, how are you?
Oh, great. As we discussed off air, I'm just fantastic. I looked in my calendar and I was like, we talked in February. A lot's changed since then.
Isn't it crazy? It really does come down to it's a completely different world.
Yes.
Yes. And anything that happened before, say, middle of March is a whole other lifetime. It's so bizarre.
Yeah, it's like pre and post.
Yes. And the key thing though is that we haven't quite moved into post yet. We're in this sort of state of limbo, I guess. Yeah. Where it's things are still being determined and it's weird. I had a conversation with somebody and it was one of those contexts of, that the last time I did that, it's like the last time I sat in a restaurant, the last time there's a lot of that going on right now.
Oh my goodness. So it's kind of like, I don't even know where to begin because on one hand, had I talked to you in say April, early May, it still would have been a bit of a conversation. And then now that I'm talking to you, in June, where it's just like, wow, where do I start with David Walker? Do you have like 4 or 5 hours?
Yeah, no, it's definitely, it has been an interesting time, to say the least. I don't want to. I'm not going to say it's been bad. I'm not going to say it's been good. It's just been interesting. Yeah, and every day it's a little more interesting.
Yeah, there's always something, and so it's funny because I try, and as you know, our mutual friend Greg Recca, he's a weekly guest on my show now. He made the mistake of telling me that he wanted to talk to me weekly during quarantine, forgetting how long quarantine might be. And so last week we did our 10th episode together, and it's funny because it's very up and down. And I talked to a lot of people and we were both talking about how we really just want to watch like happy things because everything else is just too much sometimes. And one of the things I always hear, I like to watch a lot of stand-up comics interviews, even more so than their comic routines. And they always say they write from a place of truth. And that's why it's so funny. And as you know, I'm a huge fan of your work, but and not that your webcomic's not work, because we discussed on the last time, but I love your webcomic. And the fact that what you wrote in April resonates so hard right now is just unbelievable. Like, it's just really funny. So for those that don't know what I'm talking about, David has this fantastic webcomic and I will post that here for you to see. But basically, in early April, he started writing about the effects of Corona, why does he have to wear a mask and what Corona's, what his life in Corona has been like. And so much of what you wrote is so true and hilarious at the same time. And so you even poke fun at, Black people having to wear a mask. I'm more likely to be killed by a cop versus Corona. Have you ever, and then, fast forward, not that this hasn't happened in the past, but fast forward to a month later, we're in it now, so there's so much truth behind your words, but you're still able to convey the story so humorously. And I need that humor now, but at the same time, going back to read that, you're just kind of like jarred.
It's difficult, and it's, and I haven't updated that strip in a long time. It's I hit this sort of bump in the road, an emotional bump, and I was like, I just being funny, even like half-ass funny was too difficult. So I took 1 week off, and then 1 week turned to two, and it's sort of like exercising, and then the next thing you know, you haven't worked on it. And I have a strip that's like halfway written, and I haven't finished it. And one of the artists who's a regular contributing artist, this guy Quinn, like he reaches out at least once a week, and he's like, "When are you gonna do it, man?" Because like he designed a couple new characters for me, including the Rona. Okay. The Rona is going to make a debut. So now that we're talking about this, I'm on the spot. I will next Tuesday I will debut a whole new strip, and it's interesting too because there's so much stuff that I have to say, and I've been trying to fit some stuff into some tweets here and there on Twitter, and it's not quite working, in part just because the amount of space that you have. And I was and just last night I was like, oh, you need to turn this into a comic strip, and because people weren't getting what I was trying to say, and it was dealing with this whole in part with the resurgence of the Me Too movement, which is shouldn't be a movement, it should be a way of life. We need to eradicate all forms of oppression and harassment and abuse. Yeah. But it was it was interesting because I was trying to explain to some other guys and other men through social media, if you're worried about, are you one of those people? Are you worried? If you're worried that you're one of those guys, you gotta just ask, and and I've done it. I have literally reached out to, in some cases, some women that I haven't talked to in a very long time and said, was I inappropriate? And everyone just laughs. They're like, you're an idiot. You are so, not as bad as I'm not as bad as I sometimes think I am. Yeah. Yeah. But I still think we all need to learn from it, and we need to own up to the things we've done wrong. So that's why I have a comic strip. So it'll be making a comeback very soon. Oh, very good. Very good. So thank you for letting me help you hold you accountable to it. No, I appreciate that. Yeah, I do. And I think that it's, sometimes the being a storyteller, as Greg was saying, you just want to have fun, but how do you have fun when the whole world's a garbage fire, it's literally on fire. It is. And for our listeners, it's especially, they know that I have a lot of wonderful comic creators on this show, and I have a variance of guests, but of course I have a lot of comic creators on. And so we have listeners that have no idea what comics are about, but have enjoyed these conversations. And of course, recently in the news, Warren Ellis has had a lot of controversy, a lot of issues surrounding many women coming out and sharing their stories of being groomed and being taken advantage of. And so I did see that a lot of male comic creators have been posting that, they are committing to, say no to these things and bring awareness. And as a woman, of course, I appreciate that, as well as a survivor of childhood sexual abuse. It's something that is very important to me, of course, as well. So we do appreciate that the conversation continues, because there is so much in the world going on that any little thing gets lost, like within seconds, like the newspaper, it turns. And then so you forget there are still abuse going on, and there's still things happening. And it's great that it's unfortunate that it's brought to light because there's a big story, right? But then it's wonderful when we get so many people who are speaking out and sharing, because that's healing for the victims and as well, or survivors. And it's also wonderful when we get support from allies and from people who are supportive. And like you said,
there's been a change in culture and dynamic of how we speak to one another, whether it's because of race or sex or religion. Like there's been a shift. You and I grew up in a time where my husband and I were just talking to my cousin from Canada, and we're like, yeah, there was a time for some reason you were made fun of for being stupid by calling you like a Polak, right? Like that was a thing.
Oh, God, yeah.
That was like a thing. And my Canadian cousins were like, did that ever happen in Canada? And she's like, no, never. I'm like, there it is. There's a difference between nice Canadian culture where you didn't even have that growing up. And it was just understood. And I went to Catholic school. So one would think, well, that's a whole nother conversation. Yeah. One would think you would be a little more, supposedly kind to one another, whatever. Totally false. But remember, like that was just a known thing. You said there was like jokes and it didn't seem wrong.
You'd say, "You good move, Polak." Yeah, no,
right.
That was.
And now I cringe, and so there is like on a not a small scale, but on a scale of wow, I apologize anyone I ever offended. Like you do have to look back and go, okay, has anything I ever said or done been offensive to where, even if there was no intent, it doesn't mean there wasn't damage and it doesn't mean there wasn't an impact. And I think that is really important for all of us to know that it's not about pointing fingers, but definitely about looking inward first. So, but yeah, I mean, there's so many things that I think back and I cringe about.
That is so hard to do that. Looking back, that taking accountability. And I think that, and it exists on a lot of levels, right? Because first there's maybe there's that thing you did when you were 16 or 17 years old, you said or did that, and I don't want to use that, oh, boys will be boys,
right,
sort of excuse. But we've all certainly done things that were inappropriate at one point or another. And what was unacceptable to do when you're 16 is really unacceptable to do when you're 40, right? So there's that. But then there's also like, how do you learn from it? And I think about this a lot because I have my entire life I've sort of built myself on saying things that I think are funny and things that are often inappropriate and not really caring about the collateral damage that I leave behind. Like either you can laugh at what I say or you can be offended. And if you're offended, I don't care, And now I'm to the point where it's like, oh man, I was kind of a jerk, and I still sometimes will do stuff that I say things that I think are funny or that I think are clever, and people will call me out, and sometimes I'm like, you're right, and other times I'm like, how dare you? But then I can't sleep at night, and I'm thinking about it, and I'm like, oh man, they were so right. They were, so.
And then you write a webcomic called Insomnia.
Yeah. But I do. I think there's so much to be said for accountability. And I think one of the things that's really difficult, I just had a long conversation with a friend this morning about this, is that, you don't have to do something to either be affected by it or to be accountable to it in one capacity or another. And I think that, like you were talking about Warren Ellis, and I've never met Warren Ellis, but I've met, like, there's been about 4 or 5 other men in the comic industry just within this past week that there's been some really shocking revelations about them. And I know them and I know some of their victims. And it's, it's difficult when, if you hear if somebody did something really bad to someone else, but they've never done anything bad to you, this sort of reaction as well, oh, he never sexually assaulted me. Well, first of all, I'm a guy, so he's, I'm not in his whatever I'm not what floats his boat.
You're not his target, yeah.
Yeah. But I'm not part of the equation. I have to remove myself from that and go, okay, this isn't about me. It's about the victim and it's about the victimizer. And I have to make decisions and it's difficult. I have a friend who did over 20 years in prison for murder, I don't have a problem with him as a person. He never murdered me or anyone that I know, but he destroyed a whole bunch of other people's lives. And I have to, and it isn't always black and white.
Right.
It isn't always, there's a lot of complexity to it. And I think that as we try to simplify some of these issues, it becomes difficult. And it's again, there are no straight lines. There is no 100% black. There's no 100% white. But this is a heavy conversation.
I know.
Already.
I tend to do that.
There's nothing wrong with
that. Yeah.
Greg
and I tease, like, we always try to start off with something like light, and we just immediately go into the darkness. It's just kind of my thing. I don't know why I do this to people. It's obviously me now that I know this is happening. But
Greg does it too. Greg does it too. I've had. Not only have I had many great conversations with him, but in the past, I've had him come in and guest lecture in courses that I'm co-teaching. And it's like, it's anybody's guess, which Greg you get. Will you get the loving, charming, pissed off Greg, or just the pissed off Greg? Because he's always pissed about something. And it's, and I love it dearly. I mean, he's family to me.
Yeah.
It's interesting because when I didn't really know him that well, it's like I just say he terrified the hell out of me. He still does.
I feel that vibe. Yeah, it's funny, and that is probably exactly why Greg and I get along so well. But it's really funny. It's just but if you look at like the world we're living in, how can it not get heavy so fast? Like, it would be great if I could just sit here and talk to you about comics and humor and your webcomic and everything. But even like I said at the opening, your webcomic, if it's hilarious, but if you read it, there's some heavy allegory. There's some heavy stuff in there. Just like your I don't want to say real comics. That's the wrong word, but just like Bitterroot and some of your, more notable serious works. Like I kind of separate the two, but I know they're equally as much work you put into, so I apologize if it's coming out all crazy. But first of all, and I apologize I didn't start with this, congratulations on your 2 Eisner nominations. Maybe we started with that, it would have been a happier note.
Well, thanks. No, it's but it's interesting because it's, I'm honored and it's great to be nominated, but it's also like, it doesn't seem like a time to be giving out awards for comics. I kind of disagree. I feel like we need a little bit of that normality. Like, we still need a little bit of that celebration, because we can't be all gloom and doom, right? So like, even in the midst of our 20 minutes we've been talking, it's like, obviously the world's on fire, people are dying, there's a lot of racial tension in the air. There's so much going on. There's the Me Too movement that's being rehashed because so many people have been, brought to light lately. So there's just a lot going on. But at the same time, it doesn't mean we shouldn't celebrate the wins, the LGBT win, the DACA win with the Supreme Court. That was something Greg and I just grabbed onto. We're like, look, let's celebrate something, because if we don't, we'll just be it's just be this pit of despair. And I think it's a great thing. And also it's like, for your 2 works, so Bitterroot and Naomi, so not just 1, but 2 Eisner nominations, which is fantabulous. And also 2 pieces of work that are portraying and highlighting and sharing really, really important stories right now for, African Americans, and for what you and I talked about the first time was like, oh, Bitterroot, it's such a timely thing. And, we could have said that about any decade in this country, really, right? Yeah. So it's just ironic, though, that of course now I think a lot of people maybe are ready to hear and see a little more so. And so I think there is a bit of that timeliness for something like Bitterroot to be kind of highlighted and honored. And I think it's a super fantastic thing. I think everyone should be reading it anyway, but I think maybe this will also bring a little bit more people that maybe hadn't heard of it before. Everybody looks up the Eisner nominations, right? And just reads all of that. That's what comic people, that's what you do, right? Yeah. It's like, oh, I haven't seen the nominees for Best Picture, Oscar Best Picture. I guess I should
Exactly.
work on these. Yeah.
Exactly. It's the same thing. So for our listeners that don't follow comics, it's pretty much like the Oscars for comics, and it's a really big deal. And so a huge congrats. But how do you feel about perhaps that maybe people are a little bit more open to reading and learning? Like you saw immediately, white fragility and how to be an anti-racist was like sold out, the week the
Yeah.
protest started, which is very interesting because you don't want to say, oh, now everyone's on the bandwagon. I'm thinking, yeah, get on that bandwagon, whatever
Yeah.
needs to be done. I think it's a positive thing. But what do you feel in terms of how the world, what's happening in the world right now, correlating with maybe something like your comic being read and received? Like, has that shifted?
It's very, I'm still grappling with it almost on a daily basis, because there's this feeling of like, you want there to be truth in the story that you've told or that you're telling. But there's this moment when the relevancy of the story that you're telling is so immediate and so in your face, and people are telling you, oh my God, this is just like what's going on. And it's like, well, here's a story that was set in 1924. And yeah, we're using some metaphor, we're using some allegory, but how do I feel about the fact that a story about racists who come and turn into monsters and kill people, how do I feel about that being relevant right here and now? It's like, it's a very difficult piece. And I have a graphic novel coming out early in 2021 on the history of the Black Panther Party.
Okay.
And it's, I spent the better part of 2018 and 2019 researching and writing this book. And it's, the day after George Floyd was murdered, during the first protests in Minneapolis, and we started seeing the violence that was escalating, and I was just watching it, and I was thinking to myself, yeah, I just spent all of the last year researching and writing about this, except it took place in 1965 and 1966 and 67.
Yeah.
And as a society, there's been incremental changes and incremental improvements, but the fact that we're still having these same conversations and dealing with these same problems, the fact that we, are dealing with an administration that does the things it does and says what it says, tells me that for every one step we've made forward in the society, we've made at least 5 that have gone backwards. So yeah, segregation is now illegal in this country, but that doesn't mean de facto segregation doesn't still exist. African Americans can still vote, but that doesn't mean that there isn't like election tampering and gerrymandering and rigging and it's like there's this weird feeling. It's very difficult to describe. For me, it doesn't feel particularly good.
Yeah.
It feels like, okay, well, this bad crap is still happening. It's almost like, I would much rather be able to look back in anger at the past than have to look at the present and go, this is still here. This is still happening. This is still, but that's my cross to bear. I mean, I'm fortunate enough that I get to work in comics and that I get to tell these stories. And, would I even have anything interesting to say if the world was all sunshine and rainbows, So I don't know.
Wow. That's an interesting take. I mean, I've had so many conversations on this show, obviously, since the protests have began. I've talked to several people who I feel have a lot more to contribute to the conversation than I do. Like one of my friends, he's African American who was in law enforcement. He was in internal affairs and all these things. And, we talked a great deal about that aspect. What does defunding the police mean? And is this a good thing? And he's actually quite supportive of all of that. And so it's been what I find for not just myself, but kind of for everyone, a time of learning and hopefully of listening. But it is frustrating. And I can't really imagine what's that like to, kind of wake up and see that every day this has happened. And then it's like, finally, we're at the tipping point. And now there's a lot of support. So on one hand, you have this, I'm so overjoyed that people are taking to the streets with us, literally. Like there's actually support. But then on one hand, it's like, really, it's taken this long and we're still there because this has happened how many times over and over and over through American history and history in general, right? But so it's like you said, there's just constant state of conflict, and that is something that I had definitely wondered about, because I like I said, I read your blog, and I appreciate also your openness and sharing for and positivity for mental health preparedness, that you shared that you suffer from depression, anxiety, and so that being open about that is actually very healing for many people, so thank you for that. And in addition to sharing, your steps for self-care on your blog, I think that in itself is pretty therapeutic, right? Is to kind of write it and share it, like that whole thing. And so many people are just kind of overwhelmed by all of the events and feelings that's been going on since the George Floyd murder. But is there a specific reason you feel like that video, that murder, that one? Because there's been many, and there's still been since even that. I mean, it's just, these are the ones we get to see, right? So back when there wasn't phones, and back when, I mean, why do you really feel, because I have my own theories, but I care more about yours, and I'm sure our listeners do as well. Like, why do you feel like this was kind of a tipping point? Because definitively this is different. This time is different.
I think there's a couple really key crucial factors, right? I think first of all, there is the pandemic and the absolute life-changing impact it has had, not just on this country, but on this entire planet, on the human race. And one of the most significant changes in this country right now is the fact that there aren't nearly as many diversions for our attention. You can't turn the channel to watch basketball, or you can't turn the channel to watch football, and a lot of the things that have been where we go to feel better, to self-medicate, those are gone. And so things that are happening are more in our face. And I think that also the fact that the disparity between the haves and the have-nots has become much more clear, simply because of the economic turmoil that has followed in the wake of COVID. So I think that that's a huge part. And I've talked about this a little bit before about the George Floyd video, which I have not watched all the way through.
Yeah, I can.
I don't need to watch all the way through. I've seen enough of it to know what it is for what it is. And this is years from now, maybe it'll even be months from now, someone smarter than me will articulate this. There is, even when there's video, you can, like Mike Brown, there was video of Mike Brown getting killed, and there was video of Tamir Rice getting killed. There's been a lot of video of a lot of heinous crimes perpetrated by the police. But there's this, and this isn't me agreeing with it. This is just me. This is my observation. There's always some sort of wiggle room for people to say, yeah, but, okay, yeah, but Tamir Rice was, a 12-year-old kid, but he had a toy gun and he was really tall, and, Mike Brown, yeah, but, and there's a difference between shooting someone and choking someone to death. So there's that. And I think the thing about the George Floyd video is that there's no room for the yeah, but. You can't do it. It doesn't matter what he did in the moments leading up to that video. All that matters is that his hands are cuffed behind his back. He's not moving. He's not putting up a real fight. And you know what it means to put up a fight. You know what it means to struggle, because this is part of what you teach, right? It's about movement. It's about action. It's about what can you do with the body. And he's not doing any of those things that would allow us, and by us, I do not mean you or I.
Yeah,
I'm just
of course.
talking about
Human.
whole, to say, well, what did he do before? And if that officer had been on his neck for maybe 2 minutes, and maybe we had seen a few other minutes before and his hands weren't cuffed, and it sounds so, I don't want to sound flippant, but I sound more like Mr. Spock. If you look at it from just all of these factors, it's this almost this perfect storm of events. Even with what's his name? Aubrey Ahmad, who was killed in Georgia back in February. People were still doing the yeah buts. yeah, but there'd been this wave of break-ins, and yeah, but he'd been, trespassing. Since then, all of those yeah buts have been removed, and we've been able to, with that case, to go, oh yeah, no, this is really terrible. And with Chris Cooper in Central Park, when it was just that confrontation with that woman over her dog, that was one of those moments where it's like, I've had those moments, and I've had people say to me, yeah, but yeah, maybe you're overreacting. It's like, no, it was captured on video. And so I think the way the pandemic has forced us to focus on certain things that we've been able to not look at before or dismiss, and the fact that we've had a string of events that we can scrutinize, and there's no room to say yeah but. Mm-hmm. I think that's my theory. That's and I'm, and there's obviously there's more to it than that. Mm-hmm. But I think that's the thing that comes after this is that then as the protests start, and suddenly we see cops in Buffalo, New York, brutalizing a 75-year-old man, and we see and we're hearing about these seemingly innocent white kids that are getting pelted with rubber bullets and tear gas just because they're standing up. And it's like, okay, so we're protesting police brutality, and your response is more brutality.
Yes.
And it's like, this is like a bad Abbott and Costello routine,
Yeah. And they show up looking like they're ready for a fight. Like there's just that natural reaction of how you approach someone. If you approach somebody like, hey, how are you? Or you go in all aggressive, you immediately know the crowd is defensive. I mean, there's a lot of other things we could go off on tangents about with why the rioters riot or why why things turn violent, whatever. But I mean, they showed up looking like they're ready for a fight. I mean, it was militant. Yeah. It has been very, very blatant, So I think that one of the things that I've seen in terms of a positive is of course, conversations. Like people are actually having real conversations now, like, versus doing the yeah buts. And I think there's a little bit more openness for all backgrounds to start listening and understanding that there is systemic racism. I mean, I can't believe we have to actually still convince people of this, but we do. And that's fine. I've also learned then how to have these conversations, right? Instead of just getting angry and wanting to punch someone in the face, like that's probably not the best approach. But sometimes you got to be a little more direct. But yeah. But
that's a language everyone understands.
Yeah, I know. Well, so, and then the thing that I have noticed that has shifted is even just like a year ago, the Black Lives Matter movement, the momentum it's had, and also the brand itself, like me just being kind of a business owner, like understanding that the brand itself has finally broken through. It's like stepped over the line of what I think people before had seen it as shutting down immediately when they see it, right? Yeah. Like there's been just like kind of this immediate shut, like a switch where they would see these negative connotations. They didn't want to take 2 or 3 or 4 minutes to read and understand what that meant and why. And every time I had to explain it, I was like, okay, I'm all about this movement, but man, we should have done some more marketing research so that we didn't have to educate people so harshly, because when they don't get it, they're not willing to do the work. But then on the same token, that's the point. People need to be educated. So you're in this catch-22. But I think we've finally gotten to a point where people in the past who never would have donated, marched with, believed in, stood for, held a sign with, like, I think there's finally been a little bit of a shift. Do you feel that shift will sustain all the way till November? Because that's what we need. We need all of the momentum sustaining. Something Greg and I talk about, like, obviously there's going to be more shootings. I mean, just because this is happening now doesn't mean everything will change in 4 or 5 months. I mean, there's been changes, but how do you feel like the momentum will sustain?
Well, the momentum will sustain. Will it sustain through the election? I don't know. That's too difficult of a call to make. Mm-hmm. But I think it's crucial in that if you're older, we remember that when Bill Clinton was elected, they tried to pass some semblance of affordable health care, right? Mm-hmm. And it never happened. And then we had 8 years of Bush and nothing. And then Obama comes in and we get the Affordable Care Act. And then it's the fight to repeal it, right? And it's like there's until we can get down with the program that capitalism is, in order for capitalism to really work, it has to victimize somebody, right? And it has to oppress somebody. There's always the possibility that the changes that you work towards can be undone in some capacity. So the key has to be to push through and stand strong with those changes and keep them in place. And I use the Affordable Care Act as an example because it's like there's been so much work done to try to dismantle it and discredit it. And then COVID hits and suddenly there's a lot of people that realize, oh, wait a sec, we really needed something in place here.
Yeah.
And it takes, if that's what it takes, if it takes, a Hurricane Katrina to show us how bad the infrastructure of a city like New Orleans is, then the problem is like we're well past the problem being, I want to think that we have the capacity to change. In fact, I know that we do. The question is, are we willing to make the sacrifices? And, and the thing is that there's people out there who adamantly don't want to change. And and here's the scary thing, and is that some of those people are willing to kill to keep things the way they think they should be. So how do we respond to that? And that gets into an even bigger philosophical question, because it's how do you fight for equality but also defend your life, when we're talking about the civil rights movement, they were killing kids. Yeah. They blew up the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham and killed 4 little girls. That's how opposed to desegregation they were, Yeah. And it's like, that's what you're up against. I see these photos online of the George Floyd competition where people are pretending to choke each other, Oh,
really?
And yeah. There's been a whole bunch of those.
Don't go online, you see?
Yeah.
But then I don't know anything going on if I don't go online. So it's just like,
Another cat's 22. But yeah. But I say to people, this is what we're up against. And it's not just in terms of Black Lives Matter. It's also in terms of LGBTQ and women and other quote unquote minorities. There's no value placed on our lives. We're not seen as equal human beings, not just in terms of deserving of equal rights, in terms of the right to live. Yeah. That's why those guys killed, Ahmaud Arbery. Mm-hmm. They felt he did not have the right to live. They did not see him as a human being. And so then we start getting into, it's not, is change possible? Because yes, it's possible. The question is, what's the cost of that change, and what are we willing to do? And you can ask yourself that in all sorts of questions in terms of like if we couch it in the Me Too movement and finding a way to end this victimization and oppression of women, it means having to cut ties with people that you might consider a friend. It might mean no longer doing business with. That's the cost of change sometimes, is to shut things down and to dismantle it in such a way that it doesn't exist anymore. Mm-hmm. And that terrifies people. Even, again, just within the comic industry, there's been so much in the last week and a half. And it's just like, there's a lot of soul searching. I can't speak for anybody else, but I can only speak for myself and just go, okay, here are people I can't work with anymore. Here's organizations I can't support. But then I also have to call into question, well, who backed these people when, those open secrets, the Harvey Weinstein open secret, where we know what he did. The other day, there's this thing about what Winona Ryder accused Mel Gibson of being anti-Semitic and was it anti-Semitic and homophobic or something? I can't remember what. And then Mel Gibson denied it. And I was just like, oh, maybe he wasn't anti-Semitic to Winona Ryder personally, but that dude's anti-Semitic.
Right. It's kind of known already as a fact. Yeah.
And how much people still cast him in movies?
Yeah.
It's not like we can undo Mad Max and yank him out of it.
Yeah,
and,
yeah.
But and if for some reason you still feel the need to watch a Mel Gibson movie, you can do that. But that doesn't mean he should still be given a platform and that he should still exert power and influence over people. He should be stripped of it, Mm-hmm. Plus the fact he's not a good actor. So, hey, that's, I'm one person who didn't like the Lethal Weapon movies. So.
I love it. I love it. I do want to talk about movies, but in that same regard, that's something I struggled with a lot early on as well. And I am, a conversation my husband and I have a lot is that we reserve the right to change our mind. So that's how we learn, So I have learned a wealth of information in the last year or two about criminal justice reform. Growing up, 80s, 90s or whatever, you're just like, yeah, well, sure. People should get killed in jail if it's taking up cells and taxes and you just hear what you hear. You hear the headline. And of course you're a teenager, 20s, really look into anything. And now as a full adult in my 40s, you're going, oh my goodness, reading Bryan Stevenson books and just listening to watching the 13th, right? Like, wow, was I wrong? I'm okay with saying I'm wrong and now trying to do something better, right? And so I think that applies to so many things, but there was always a lot of conflict. People would come to me and ask and like, oh, easiest example I can think of is, can you still make a Bill Cosby joke and talk about Jell-O and his voice and all of these things? Can you still feel that way you feel about his art or his movies or his shows? And at one point I was like, well, that was a character and this is the person and blah, blah, blah. And then, as I learned more, as I researched, as I started to be more public about my experience and my survivor story and everything, and I read a lot more books and articles, I realized that, well, this is someone that preyed upon people. And due to those actions and due to all the things he did, like he took that away from someone else that might have had those opportunities, like his power over people, right? And so his opportunities were because of these horrible acts that he's doing. So it's kind of like the blood diamond thing. It's kind of like, oh, well, you have this, you didn't kill a person that whatever, but it's like, do you want something from Blood Money? Do you want something where kids have been killed and so you're wearing this designer sweater or all of these? Like it becomes this, like you said, this long philosophical. Did you see there's a fun little, not fun, but like Killer Mike has a thing on Netflix and he's trying to do like Black support only for 3 straight days and he was starving because everywhere he went there wasn't a Black farm where the food came from and he was trying to do kind of. And you just realize how hard it is. Like you said, there's so many connective dots, how hard it is. You're trying to do the right thing. And what I like to tell people, and again, who am I to say anything, but just my opinion, but you just do the best you can and don't beat yourself up and just keep trying to do better, right? Like it may not be perfect. I'm not going to lie. Of course, I still get things from Amazon. Like I'm not going to pretend that I don't. I have been trying, but then when it's so hard, like you just want to get a laundry basket. Like I just wanted a laundry basket and I tried to get it from like a local thing and it was just this disaster. I'm like, forget it. I'm just going to order it so I can get it tomorrow. Right. So, but we just try it. We just do the best we can.
No, I agree. And it's interesting that you brought up Bill Cosby because I have a discombobulated strip coming up that, it's been a long time. It's taken me about a year to write just this one simple strip, and it's about Bill Cosby. It's about more than just Bill Cosby, but it's about reconciling that inner conflict over the artist versus their action. Yeah. And, and I just bought a book off of Amazon the other day and I was feeling so guilty. I went to a bunch of other booksellers online to see, and it was like everybody else was selling it for $30 and they had it for like 16. And I was like, I need to save some money here.
Well, because you can put that towards something else. You have to weigh it. Yeah.
No, but it's difficult. And that's I think the most important thing is that people need to recognize, the first step, and it's not the most important thing, but it's the first step, is to recognize that even though you might not be participating in it actively, it doesn't mean that you're not benefiting from it. That's one of the key ingredients about understanding slavery, is that people make this argument, well, my family didn't own slaves, or that was a long time ago and we need to get over that. And it's like, well, first of all, it doesn't matter if your family owned slaves or not, because essentially this entire country was built on the economic wealth that was generated by slavery. Mm-hmm. Because if you have literally millions of people working for no money at all, you make a lot of money. I mean, we see this now in sweatshops all over the world. It's like they're paying people pennies, mm-hmm. and it's like, because that's the least amount you can get away with. But I guarantee you, if there's a whole lot of companies out there that they could get away without paying people, if they could get away with forced labor for life, that's what the prison industrial complex is, right? How many private prisons in America employ prisoners for like 14 cents an hour?
Yeah. And it's like one of the only countries that has like a for-profit prison dynamic. It's out of control. I think it's like here in the Philippines or something like that. It's crazy though.
It's bonkers. Yeah. And so, but that's the thing. You might not know where, the headphones, what exactly went into the headphones that you're wearing.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Who made them? Where did all the parts come from? Yeah. And I know some people that try to live their life on such a ethical hard line, and it's not only is it difficult, I don't even know if it's possible to be 100%. But right. The key is to understand it, and to begin to try to make changes, and going back to the pandemic and realizing that Amazon kind of is an evil company, mm-hmm. or has aspects of them that aren't good. It's really caused me to rethink stuff. There's stuff that I really wanted to buy that I just simply didn't buy because I was like, well, I can't get it. It's these sort of, we've become conditioned by Amazon, like, oh, hey, I want to get, this special edition Prince album. I'll just, I'll just get the digital download. I can get it right now. Or I want this book, but it's all sold out. So I'll just get the Kindle version. We've all done it. And it's like, sometimes you just have to rethink it and just go, do I need it today? Can I get this somewhere else? Mm-hmm. And I've been doing that a lot. It's like, the fine art of me buying a book these days has become so complicated, because libraries are closed too. So you can't even get books.
You can only do digital. Yeah.
Yeah. But I go to all the websites and I'll spend an hour just trying to decide, okay, where's the most ethical place to buy In Search of Bigfoot, published in 1978,
It is a rabbit hole, though. Like you said, you can make yourself a little crazy over it. And that's why I say, we just do the best we can with everything. And it's not just about good intentions and just apologizing when you're wrong, but it's really, if you really are doing the best you can, I think that people know that. And we're just constantly trying to evolve. I did want you to kind of expand a little bit about, maybe, like you said, you've been doing all this research for the book that you're going to do in 2021, and how you're like, wow, it's all kind of exploding now. What was that kind of like for you when everything started in May, knowing that you had all of this information in your brain? Not that you didn't know a lot of it before, but I know when you research for a book, it's quite a different thing. Interestingly enough,
it allowed me to detach from some of it a bit more. And so, like, when we were talking earlier about what's the difference between what we're seeing now and some of the other things we've seen in the past and why people are reacting to George Floyd this way, I was sort of able to step back from this in a little bit more, I call it my Mr. Spock mode, right? It was a little bit more logical. Mm-hmm. And because the reality is like, this was coming. This is there's not, we should not be surprised about any of this. And I've talked about this, and there's a section in the book that actually in the book that talks about this, talks about the Presidential Kerner Commission and the report that they issued in '68 that spelled out word for word everything that we're seeing happen right now in this country. And it said at the time that America was essentially two countries, one black, one white, separate, unequal, and moving further and further apart. And it spelled out, if we don't do this, if we don't spend more on education, if we don't spend more on fair housing, if we don't do all these things, and if we continue to spend money on the police and the military, this is where we're going to go. And it's going to lead to more violence. And this was all in response to violence that had been, especially in the 1965, 1967, and then again it sparked up in 68. But it literally, like, because I've read the Kerner report, and it's not exaggerating when I say it's all there.
Yeah.
It's literally like, when you check you go to the Weather Channel, it says sunrise will be at 6:53, and then 6:53. It's like, how did they know? I don't know how they know, but they knew, right?
Yeah.
And so, I was thinking about that, and and it was interesting because the book is really close to being done. And the week before George Floyd had been murdered, I had written the afterword. And, that's always the last part of the book you write. And it's, this was back in May, and the book isn't going to come out till January. And so I hate writing the afterword. And I wrote it, and it took forever. And I turned it in. And then the night of the first protests in Minneapolis, when they burned the police precinct, I sat down and rewrote the entire afterword, and I emailed my editor the next morning and said, we have to have this. This has to replace what I wrote. And in the afterword, I say, spoiler alert, I said that the Panthers had what they called their 10-point program, and it was what we want and what we believe. So there's actually 20 points to it. There's 10 things that we want and 10 things that we believe. And every single one of those things that they wrote in 1966 is still relevant today. Every single thing. And the stuff that they're talking about is they want an end to police brutality. They want fair housing. They want good jobs that pay an affordable wage. It's 10 things. It's not a 100-point program.
Yeah.
It's 10. Look, I got fingers and thumbs. I got 10 of them. We can count the things that they're demanding. And this was, again, they drafted this in 1966. So that was only 54 years ago. It wasn't that long ago, right? We know people who were alive back then, and they're still spry people. It's not like they're, that 95-year-old grandma that we see that doesn't even know what day of the week it is. No, these are our parents, maybe, or in some cases our grandparents. And the fact to see how little has changed, one of the key things that prompted Bobby Seale and Huey Newton to form the Panthers was that the police in Oakland shot and killed a black man, shot him in the back. It was a guy named Denzel Dowell. I think they shot him 6 times, changed the police report, lied about it. And everything that we're seeing now happened then. And so it doesn't feel good to be able to say these things that I'm saying, but it's also allows me to, for the most part, not freak out and have horrific anxiety, although I do. Right. There's at least once a day, there's a moment where I'm like, because every day, and this is the thing, well, every week we hear about another person who's been killed by the cops. But now we're starting to hear about the cases that happened a year ago, 2 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. And now for myself personally, I've now hit a point where it's like, I can't handle it anymore. It's like, okay, I was able to handle it when I was hearing one new name a week, maybe 2 names a week, which is a screwed up thing to say anyway, right?
Yeah. But it's the reality. Yeah.
Yeah. So I put it in context like this. In 2019, there were just under 2,000 people killed by the police. I can't remember the exact number of how many of those were black folks that were killed by the police. But let's just say, for the sake of argument, it was only 1,500 people. That's still nearly, 3 people a week?
Yeah.
When you really think about it, because there's, they ain't but 52 weeks in a year.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that sort of is just infuriating. And to know that, and I think that part of the problem for people understanding the Black Panthers just as it's difficult, I think, for people to really relate to the Black Lives Matter movement, and there's a huge difference between the two, but it's that if it's forcing people to really sort of look at like how business is done. Mm-hmm. And it's like, if you can't trust the police to not kill you and then lie about it, what is there left? Mm-hmm. I mean, they last, and not to get too heavy, but last week, cops in Georgia killed a guy for sleeping in his car.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, it's, and on video, they have him saying, "I'll walk home." Mm-hmm. You know, he's not saying, "Oh, I'm going to kill you." At some point, it escalated to the point where they killed him. But before that happened, he said, "I'll walk home."
Yeah. Yeah.
Would it not have been easier for those cops to say, "Why don't we give you a ride home?"
Right. Right.
They could have done that. They could have loaned him money for cab fare or let him call an Uber or Lyft. There's at least 5 things they could have done that didn't involve hurting the guy.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
killed. And you know, I how many of us have done stupid things where we've had a little bit too much to drink and we've driven, you know? I've done it. I haven't done it in 30 something years.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I understand.
You know, and it's like you start to think about the things that people are doing when they're killed by the police. When you're sleeping in your bed and you haven't done anything wrong and you get killed by the police, that's not an accident. Because an accident to me is like you think you're going to fart and you accidentally crap your pants, or you're reaching to pull the milk out of the refrigerator and it slips and it falls on the floor. Accidents, people don't end up dead.
Yeah.
That's something else. We need another word for it when someone ends up dead. And especially when it's in that context. Mm-hmm. It's you know, and I'm mad, but what are you going to do? You stay mad and then you channel that anger into something. And for me, it's trying to be creative without being too much of a downer, you know?
Well, I think you're doing a brilliant job. Again, though, the webcomic came out before the protests and before George Floyd's murder. So it really hit home, but you're right. And there's not a lot that we can do to assure ourselves this is not going to continue. But I think that everyone listening, learning, having conversations, learning how to have empathy and understanding is a good start. And to kind of backtrack a little to your discussion about the Black Panther Party, I actually just recently learned like a lot more just through reading a book called Solitary. The inmate, you know, he was a really avid fan of the Black Panther fan. He was an avid member, and it really basically saved his life. And I didn't understand a lot about the party because it did again have that, they're like a, you know, maybe a violent group or these negative connotations. And then you find out they were just really about social justice and trying to help so many people in the community, and that the FBI is the one that kind of basically went through and dismantled it and did all these things. And so I recently just learned even a lot about that. And that is something that you hear about growing up, and, you know, you watch movies and everything, which are not really a great source to learn things from. But yeah, it's something that I've had discussions on as well about the whole social contract. Like I've tried to explain to my non-Black friends, well, when you are sick, you go to the hospital, you show your insurance card, you get help, you get your medicine, you go home. When you have a problem, you call the police, they show up. When you have a fire, like that's the social contract. Like things work for you the way it's supposed to. And that's why you don't see that when all of that's taken away, say that you wanted anything done and you get none of it done, none of the things that you think are supposed to happen societally, like that's where most of this is coming from, the anger and the frustration and what Black people as a whole have had to deal with because of the systemic racism that stems from slavery and down the line of all these things that are ingrained in our culture. And so it's hard for people to understand, but that has been one way I feel people can understand, because most people, I'm myself included, it's like, well, how does this affect me? So if you kind of try to imagine how this would affect you, like how
Yeah.
would it affect you if anytime you needed something that you think is normally okay, like your electricity should be on, or you get to go to school and you
Yeah.
get to do these things, all these opportunities that you take for granted. Like, what if all of that was not there? But you're still just trying to do the best you can. You know, you would be pretty pissed off too. So I think that's usually a good way to help, you know, explain it. Like, it was a good way for me when I heard someone else explain that. Wow, that's a great way for me to help kind of start that conversation. And there is so much frustration with that. But one is I'm looking forward to the book, and I know we have to wrap up soon, but I wondered if you're relieved that you wrote it before like all the turmoil, because would it have caused like a little bit harder? Would it have been harder for you to write amidst this? Like if you were halfway or something?
It would have been really hard to write because in part I would probably want to include some of what's going on now.
I see. Yeah.
And I tried to write the book as objectively as possible. Mm-hmm. You know, I tried to be as dispassionate and non-biased as possible. You know, yeah, the FBI are the villains in this story, but I tried not to get too heavy-handed in my analysis. And I can tell you right now that I wouldn't be able to do that at this moment in my life. My anger and rage, and honestly, that writing that book, researching that book, broke me down in ways that I'm still putting the pieces back together. So, you know, but it's an important book, and if people get something out of it and they learn something from it, that's fine, and it will be worth the high blood pressure and the spike in all of the things you don't want spiking, from your blood sugar to your cholesterol. So it'll be good. I'm looking forward to the conversations it will spark. So,
and you have been under finishing a book, I can only imagine, is an enormous undertaking. So and with COVID and with all of the craziness going on in the world, what are you doing to kind of relax and unwind and give yourself some moments of self-care?
Not enough, unfortunately. I'm working on it, though. I've been going for walks, but not as much as I used to, because I'm paranoid these days. I'm paranoid that every white van that passes me is going to be some guys are going to like shoot or whatever, you know? Wow. Yeah. But you're in Portland, right? I'm in Portland, yeah, okay. Which is, well,
it's a good thing you're not here. I'm in Florida, so you wouldn't go anywhere. You'd stay inside.
Oh, yeah, well, because it's also humid and you have alligators and all that stuff. Now, we have our
But also it's an open carry state, and it's, they're all about their guns here, so...
Yeah, no, it's difficult, but I'm trying. One of the things that I'm doing is I'm just talking to people about some of the problems that I'm facing, and to let people know that they're not alone. Mm-hmm. And I've really been thinking about how to get more involved in mental health issues for Black folks, because it's something that we, it's like, I can't tell you how many of my friends say, oh yeah, I'm cool. And it's like, no, you're not cool. And, it's a lot of, I'm feeling a little bit off today. And it's like, that's our way of saying I'm depressed. I'm totally screwed up. I'm not quite sure where I'm going with any of this yet, but I know that there's, it's like, oh, there's a path over there. I see a path. I think that's where I'm supposed to be. So, yeah.
Nice. Yeah. And not to open another can of worms, but I know like in the Asian American community, therapy, mental health, there's huge stigma around it. Like, do not talk about that. That doesn't, you're fine. I think I just admitted, it all kind of happened about when I shared my survivor story as well. But I was like, yeah, I've been in therapy for like over 10 years. My mom did not even know till like, a year or two ago. Yeah. So it's just because there's such a stigma around it. And I understand it to be kind of similar as well in the Black community.
Yeah, no, it's something we have to get over, but how do we do it? And I think one of the best ways to do it is talk about it and to be vulnerable. And if that's what you got to do, that's what you got to do. But there's somewhere out there, there's someone who still thinks that going into therapy makes you weak, or it's not going to do any good. And that person's, they're doing harm to themselves, and they're doing harms to people they're around.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So I am I'm taking a lot of naps. That's what I've been doing. A lot of
naps are good. You can take some for me. So I don't get any naps. So I am going to give you a hard time because I see that you've been reviewing a lot of films, and I'm still waiting for you to review my film.
It's so funny because it's like, it's on my watch list on Amazon, but that watch list is so long.
I get it.
And it's
I totally get it.
Scheduled this. I was like, I gotta watch this before.
You're like, oh shit, I got a timeline. And then I'm like, hey, do you want to meet Tuesday? And it was like a day before. Yeah. I know. I'm just giving you a hard time because I did see that you've been writing some movie reviews.
I haven't posted any in a while, and they're older reviews actually.
Right.
They're all from my past life. But no, I should talk. I should watch it, and then I should have you come on my podcast because I just started doing a podcast recently.
Really? Tell me about that. I didn't know.
It's just my cousin and I have started, we talk all the time. We talk about pop culture. We talk about politics.
What is it called?
Badass Mofo.
Of course it is.
Mofo.
I could have guessed that.
We haven't started having guests yet, but we need to. So
okay.
I will watch that. I'll get him to watch it too.
Yeah.
And then we'll bring and we can talk about it.
Oh, that would be so much fun. I would love that. Yeah. And so listeners, David's got a podcast, so we'll link that here for you as well. Well, as always, I really enjoy talking to you, and I'm so glad we got the opportunity to catch up amidst all the crazy. Reach out anytime, and I will definitely look forward to hearing from you and being on your podcast.
Yep. Thank you. It's good talking to you.
That's all for today's episode. Thanks for listening to Culture Chat, and hope you enjoyed the conversation. Please subscribe and rate my podcast. Feel free to leave me suggestions or send an email to mimi@culturechatpodcast.com or follow me on social media at Sifu Mimi Chan on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook.